Okay, so Aaron, man, I really appreciate you taking some time. Welcome to the Fabricators Coach podcast.
Man, so glad to be with you, Ed. It's a privilege, and I'm excited about this topic.
Well, it's always fun talking. In fact, we in the past when we've done some of these episodes together, we my wife kind of has a challenge when she has to edit because we start talking and forget. Wait a minute, we got to structure a podcast here. So we try not to do too much of that this time, so we get a lot of good content for the listeners. So again, I appreciate it. The thing we're going to focus on today is safety. It's gotten to be a really big topic, obviously because of silicosis.
Mhm.
There's lots of other things going on in safety. You and I both have got some opinions about where this is headed. I think let's start with you're the chairman of the safety committee for NSI. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't want to overstate the position in terms of what that means. I'm on the safety committee, and so that is comprised of a bunch of stone industry companies that basically contribute to this fund that essentially makes the NSI safety materials free for the industry. So that's really how it kind of came to be. And so then we're definitely um, offering input on these safety topics and also funding the materials and the resources that they've made available. NSI has been doing a lot of work to develop structured professional safety resources for the industry. In the past, you had to be a member to get access to them, but they felt like this is such an important issue that we needed to kind of change the way it's done. And so that's what that committee does. Yeah, like I said, I don't want to overstate my role in that, but I kind of fell into it. I volunteered to be the vice chair, and then the chair resigned, and I found myself as the chair. And so I get to sit in on these meetings and learning a lot. And obviously, this safety topic is um, it's interesting being on the inside of that. On one hand, it's like, oh my gosh, there is a lot going on, especially in the state of California with silicosis. And then I'll go talk to fabricator that I've got relationships with, very legitimate, safety-oriented companies that have absolutely no idea that this silicosis issue is where it's at. They're completely unaware. They're so busy running their businesses, and it's really flying under the radar. So it's this interesting sort of paradox. There's a
Yeah.
lot going on, and yet it isn't obvious to a lot of people what's going on. And so it is an important topic, and that's what the NSI is doing, is trying to make it more known in terms of not just the legislative issue and the prospect of quartz being completely banned in the state of California and what that means potentially for the rest of the country, but the fact that there is a massive safety issue when it comes to silicosis, and the NSI has a bunch of great resources, for fabricators that want to improve and their operations and make them more, make them safer.
Okay, so that's fairly new to me. I thought I had heard that they had made their safety resources available and free. It's great to hear officially they are free. I know that's NSI does a lot of things, but one of the things they're really known for is some really great safety materials. So anybody who's listening that's not a member can actually go to the NSI website. That's naturalstoneinstitute.org, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and access that material. They've got I think it's a 4 hour certification on silicosis. You get silicosis certified. So a lot
Yeah.
of really great resources out there. So as we talk about safety, anybody who's not a member, that's a great place they can go to get help. So I think that's super. Let's before we get into what's going on with silicosis, is there anything else that the safety committee is focused on other than just kind of making materials available and things like that? You guys got any other initiatives out there?
Yeah, well, that training that you've referred to, they actually call it the Silicosis and Slab Handling Safety Certification. And so it actually includes a pretty good module or modules on just material handling, slab safety. And that's another kind of subcommittee that we're working on right now. It was brought to our attention in the meeting last week, our quarterly meeting, that another stoneworker was killed, I think last week. They
Oh
didn't
man.
divulge the company or even the state that it happened in. I think it was in the southeast, but it was
Wow.
another uh, um, accident that occurred moving slabs, and a worker was crushed and died. And so, that's another one. Silicosis is huge because there are people dying from that disease as a result of the quartz dust and the silica in the air. But there's still, way too many people being killed and injured by material handling. And we, so that's the subcommittee. What we're working on is a set of standards, because the stone industry is still, despite all that the Natural Stone Institute has done, it is still very much the Wild West. And one of the things that happens is there'll be a tragedy like this. OSHA will obviously become involved, and then they'll reach out to the NSI and go like, "Hey, what do we do here? This shouldn't be happening. Where are the standards?" And it's like, there really aren't any. I mean, there are best practices, but in terms of there being clear-cut, regulated guidelines for safety, it's the Wild West. And so that's one of the subcommittee projects that we're working on, is to develop a set of guidelines for slab storage, number one, so that we can actually provide that to OSHA to say, hey, here's some best practices that should be in place. And the interesting thing is, it's like, well, who do we go to verify this? And it's like, well, there isn't anybody. It's just this vacuum, if you will.
Yeah.
And so that's something we're trying to develop, is some level of standardization first for just storage, transportation. A lot of these truckers are being killed. They're not stone guys. They show up with a flatbed, they throw some A-frames on the truck, throw some straps over them, and they take them to a shop. And if they're not on a level surface, and they pop the straps and they're standing on the wrong side of that A-frame, I mean, that's happening. So that's another kind of aspect of that same issue of setting guidelines for transportation. And it's kind of a blank slate right now. And yeah, here's what's interesting. So I've been out of my shop for almost 3 years now, and still involved in no lift. And we've got some slabs in the shop that we use for testing. And, as we're working on prototypes, and we're trying to, see at what point a machine will fail, and what kind of tolerance our designs have and whatnot. So having been out of the slab business, or the fabrication business, for almost 3 years now on these rare occasions when I'm even just moving a slab with the forklift, I'm not exaggerating this at all. I am stunned, and I won't say terrified, but I am shocked at how heavy this material is.
Yeah.
It's like I never really appreciated it, because I've been in it and around it for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And now, having been out of it, it is just like I am genuinely uneasy when we're putting even an island-sized countertop on one of our carts to maneuver in the shop. It's just like, 700 pounds could kill you.
Yeah.
And so I don't think there's enough focus on that. I think we are all so familiar, and we're so sort of acclimated to this heavy material, we fail to appreciate just how dangerous this work is. And so, I'm really pleased that these, as uncomfortable as they make me, and I think as uncomfortable as they make everybody else, I think it's I think it's really important that this topic be brought back into the conversation. So,
Yep. It's great to hear that you guys are working on some standards. I think that's huge for this industry. It is a bit of a Wild West, and yeah, I think having some standards out there to help folks out is a really good start. It's good to hear.
Yeah.
So let's get back into silicosis for a minute. You mentioned the fact that you're still surprised when you run into the decent sized, well-run fab shops that don't even know what's going on with silicosis. You want to give us a quick snapshot of what's happening with Australia and with California and some other things that maybe you're aware of?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what I know. It's possible that I don't know. It's likely I don't know everything, and it's possible I might get a detail or two wrong. So just know that I don't consider myself an expert on this. But what I do know, Australia has officially banned the sale, the fabrication, I think even the importation of quartz slabs.
Yep.
Took effect January 1. By June 30th, it's over. That it is just no longer something that can be sold or fabricated and installed.
Right.
That's pretty shocking. I talked to a fabricator probably 2 weeks ago in Australia, and he was kind of walking me through. It took about 4 years, and in Australia, it was they refer to stone workers there as stone masons. That's kind of the equivalent term for a fabricator installer. And the stonemasons union started to pick up on this silicosis issue and people getting the disease and dying from it. And man, they made a big deal out of that, and they were really the driving force behind bringing that to light in their regulatory, sort of system there, and it was banned. And so that's a fact. Quartz has been banned. From what this fabricator said, it looks like a lot of companies now are just sort of transitioning towards the ultra compact Decton type surfaces.
Yep.
That are essentially going to more or less replace the quartz. So that's Australia. California, similar. The way this basically got on the radar of the state was numerous stone workers went to the hospital with this problem, this lung issue, and the medical community kind of began to see this trend developing in the state of California. Lots of people with an abnormal number of people coming in with silicosis, which is the disease caused by breathing, stone dust or quartz dust. And then quite a number of workers died. And then it was sort of this, they began to discover, hey, the common thread here is every one of these silicosis cases has worked in a countertop shop. And that's really how it got on the radar of the legislature there. And so I think it was LA County first. And this is where I'm a little hazy on the differentiation between California, they call it Cal OSHA, the statewide sort of safety body, versus LA County. Maybe it's both. But they were considering an outright ban on quartz, just like Australia. I think it's still possible.
Yep.
At the moment, there is I got to get the acronym right. It's like temporary emergency standards, or roughly that's the idea, that while they figure out what's going on and while they do the research, the industry, the NSI is very, very involved at the legislative level, trying to educate, trying to make sure they don't way overstep, overreact to this and write a bunch of rules that cripple the industry or make it impractical to fabricate. So they're trying to bring some balance to that. But in the interim, it's an absolute. Now, what I learned, that these temporary emergency standards, again, I may have that acronym wrong or backwards, but that's basically what it is. These are regulations that are in place right now. Absolutely zero tolerance for creating dust. If an OSHA rep walks into your shop and you are creating dust, they have the authority now to shut your shop down. Basically, you're done. Now, whether they can enforce that long term, I mean, that's a different, the enforcement side of it's a different story. Mandatory, it's PAPR. PAPR, that is a pressurized or powered respiratory system. So instead of just a respirator that basically operates by you breathing, it is a self-contained full face mask, battery operated pump that basically forces that air through an approved filter so that the worker is completely isolated from any dust in the air. And so that is a current requirement. There are a couple other requirements. So
now, is that type of breathing apparatus required if you're cutting dry, or even if you're cutting wet, they require that?
Right now, even if you're cutting wet, even if you're showing no measurable silica in the air, it's a blanket policy across the board. Now, again, how many of those fabricators know that? I'm guessing it's a very small percentage of them. And how many of them are doing that? I have no idea. But that's one of those emergency standards that they put in place while they try and figure out what they're going to do.
So that must be LA County, because I'm working with some smaller fabricators in the southern part of the state. They've not mentioned any requirements for that, and they're aware of silicosis for sure. In fact, one of them told me the other day that he personally was aware of something like a dozen shops that were shut down last month in LA County because of silicosis. So yeah, I hadn't heard about the breathing apparatus. That's interesting. Okay.
Yep. And I wish I had, I should have requested that agenda from our meeting last week that had, the list of those things, but it's available. I mean, if someone wanted to reach out, I could find that. If someone, especially in LA County, is wondering, I'd go to the NSI first. One of the things they're considering is I think legislation has been proposed to require certification, some level of safety certification, to buy quartz, and it would basically be up to the slab, the quartz manufacturers, the slab distributors, to police that
Yeah.
and to insist on that certification before they'll sell. But that's not a law. That's just been proposed.
Yeah. So have you heard about any other states that are starting to put some pressure on this issue as well?
I have not. No, I'm not aware of any other states that are where it is at this level. Now, what is assumed is that so goes California, so goes the rest of the country. And
Yeah. Yeah.
if what they decide to do is probably going to influence the rest of the country eventually.
Yeah. And I've heard rumors that there are other states that are looking at this, but I haven't heard of any formal, final guidelines or crackdowns or enforcement, anything like that. But I think the smart money says know the issues, get out there, do what you got to do to get your shop straightened out, get take advantage of the NSI training. Heck, it's free. Why not? And for the right reasons, because as I understand it, there is no cure for silicosis. The silica crystal, when it gets into your lungs, it's spiny, kind of like a burr, and it once it gets in there, it can't come out, and it causes your lungs to harden. And the only cure for it, only way you stop it is either a lung transplant or death. That's your two options.
Yeah. And they've highlighted, you're exactly right. That's exactly what I understand from the education that I've received. Again, and even though I'm out of it, it is an extremely uncomfortable topic to talk about, because it's like, man, I thought we were doing a pretty good job, but were we doing enough? You start asking that question, and that'll sober you up real quick. And but we got to talk about it. And from what I know in this education process, yeah. And there's numerous people that they've highlighted in some of the news reports down in California that are literally dying. And if they don't get a lung transplant, they will be dead in the next year or two. And and that's what they got for working in a dry fab shop for a few years. Not worth it.
And this is, I cut my teeth in textiles very early in my career, and brown lung, the cotton dust issue. And so the dynamic of something in the environment that can be deadly, because with that, there is no cure either. It's a transplant or you die. And so I'm familiar with what that does to the workplace, some things you have to do. And in our industry now, you talk about about it being a pretty, not only serious, but also it's scary. If you owned a shop today and you went to hire a good, experienced fabricator who's been in the industry for 10 or 15 years, you really have to go ahead and do a baseline lung test, pulmonary test on day one, and then do annual testing every year to make sure you're not hiring a liability.
Yeah.
And it's not just the risk to the company, it's also to do the right thing for the employee. Because if the employee has been working in the industry for 10 or 15 years, never had a lung test, and doesn't know that they've got early signs of silicosis, then, knowing that early on could save their life, could extend their life greatly. So there's that aspect as well.
Yeah, 100%. And to that point about the liability, obviously, if you can catch somebody and let them know, hey, you're pretty far down this path, you may want to find another. You've probably breathed enough, perhaps go look for another line of work. I mean, that would be a huge benefit and blessing to that employee.
Oh, yeah.
The other side of that, you mentioned the liability. What's really interesting, and there's Mark Rosenkrantz is a insurance executive company in the Northeast, and they've specialized for, I think, a couple of generations in one of their primary focuses is insuring fabrication companies. So they're very knowledgeable. And in a meeting a while back, he offered the suggestion that you may want to double check your policy, because most business policies, this is shocking, most business policies have what they call a silica exclusion.
Holy smokes.
it's not just that they don't include silica as something that they cover, it's that they explicitly exclude silica from the policy. It's called a
Wow.
silica exclusion. And this I when I heard this the first time, we still had our countertop shop, and I was like literally in a panic to get off the phone or off the call to call our insurance broker and say, this cannot, I mean, I've been in business for 20 plus years. Is it possible that we've never been covered for this?
Yeah.
Turns out our policy had a silica exclusion.
Holy
And
smokes.
we had to go get a separate policy. So that liability that you're talking about, not only might you be liable, it is not just possible, but probably likely that you're not even covered if that issue was to come up and you were to be, find yourself in a lawsuit, litigation, a claim. Your insurance may not even cover it. And so that is something that to me is like worth the price of admission for this conversation for somebody.
Oh man, how about getting your money's worth for a podcast? That's
Yeah,
gold right there in more ways than one. Holy smokes.
yeah, shocking.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'm thinking of, okay, as soon as this is over, I got some texts I need to send to some clients just to make them aware. Because yeah, I've been recommending, the pulmonary testing on hiring and the annual and the whole bit, and this is like, wow, you need to go a whole lot further than that.
Yep.
Man.
And it wasn't hard to do. It was just a series of steps just to add that to the policy. But they weren't letting us know. It wasn't like the insurance agent was, oh, by the way, we don't cover this. It was whether they even knew or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But we were not covered, and it's pretty scary.
Holy smokes. Wow. So obviously, this is a critical issue for the right reasons, for making sure our employees are well taken care of and people don't die as a result of making countertops for people's houses. There's also the obvious liability potential for shop owners. So those are critical. What do you guys, when you get beyond silicosis, with your work on the safety committee for NSI, are you seeing any other safety related issues popping up beyond silicosis that maybe shop owners need to be aware of that could be coming down the pipe?
No, nothing official in terms of a regulation. And it's interesting. OSHA had, I think it was 2017, had begun to change. They were in the process of adjusting the allowable exposure levels that had been in place since 1973. And so that was sort of working its way through the system. I understand, my understanding is that the stone industry was on their radar, but it was just like, yeah, because they produce silica like gravel companies and probably a lot of other industries.
Right.
So it took some time for that to kind of work its way through. Well, then COVID hit and sort of stopped all of that. And so it's really, there's been like a 2 or 3-ish year sort of delay. And now that is just ramping back up. So silica really is the primary focus of at least OSHA. It is continuing that work, the exposure levels, and now with quartz in and of itself being so uniquely concentrated, such a measurably higher concentration of the silica in that product compared to even granite.
Yeah.
That now is just kind of sucking all the air out of the room in terms of the focus, from what I understand. And that's not to say there aren't safety issues out there. I mean, there clearly are, but from a regulation standpoint, the silica is the only one I'm aware of.
And so when we talk about the whole product issue, almost all quartz, I understand that there are 1 or 2 brands out there that don't have silica, or they have very, very low silica, but quartz is the greatest offender. Mm-hmm. Do you know offhand what the percent silica is in most quartz products?
No, and I would probably maybe expand that to just so there's no confusion. Quartzite has become so popular, which is a natural stone, quarried stone that I've heard, I don't know this to be the case, has a higher concentration of silica compared to granite. But when we're talking about quartz, it's engineered stone. Your Cambridge, Cosentino, your South Stone, your Caesar stones, that's quartz that we're talking about. It is the engineered. And so no, I just know that it is significantly higher. But it probably depends, the lack of testing, again, it comes back to my beef with this Wild West industry that we're in. There is no standardization. There is no governing body that establishes any sort of criteria, not just to meet, but also to publish where that's being scientifically studied. And because nobody really knows what they're working with
Yeah.
because there's no standards.
Right.
At least it's not easily or readily available to anybody. And so that question is kind of hard to answer in a real specific sense.
Okay. And I've seen some numbers, but I don't remember them, and I don't want to put them out there because I don't have any confidence in offering something accurate. So I don't want to I don't want to misrepresent. But you're right. The engineered quartz products, with a couple of exceptions, I've heard that there are one or two out there that were engineered to have very low silica, but quartzite has silica in it naturally. Granites have silica in them naturally, much lower level. So even though you may be a shop that decides to get away from quartz altogether, go to natural products only, doesn't totally eliminate the problem, but does probably make it a little more manageable.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why the Natural Stone Institute has been Jim Heeb, the CEO of the Natural Stone Institute, Mark Mario as well. That they'll mention this, that they get asked, "Hey, you're the Natural Stone Institute. Why do you care wouldn't it be in your best interest that quartz is banned? It would help the natural stone producers, obviously," and that's probably true. But their response is just what you're alluding to. But granite's got silica in it too. It's less, but in a principled, sort of perspective, you ban quartz, then you have a justification to ban granite as well. And so the reality is it can be fabricated and installed safely. It's not like you can't do this job safely. That's the maddening thing about it, honestly, is because it is not that expensive and it's not that difficult to put those controls in place in a fabrication shop in an install setting to massively reduce the exposure to those employees. It's just
and the probably single most common and pretty effective control is just to go from cutting dry to cutting wet.
Yeah. If you eliminate just the airborne dust in the air, again, scientific, I don't know what the percentage is, but that is a huge. I mean, we had OSHA come in and do some voluntary testing, and there were areas in our shop on the day that we had them bring those monitors in. It showed up. We were planing backsplash on our bridge saw, and we hit the level at that time. But there are other places in our shop where the guys were working where it couldn't detect any silica on their monitor, and we weren't doing anything other than what you're saying. Is just we had a zero tolerance policy for dust.
And I think I think your example of milling down the backsplash is good. I think it's a good example of the fact that cutting wet is the most common solution. It is not always 100% complete solution. There may be other things that you've got to do. And I want to be clear that we're not saying that just do the one thing and you're okay. There are other things you got to look at too. And the key is, as you just alluded to, you got to go through the monitoring process and you got to stay on top of that. And it's not a one and done. You got to do it on a regular basis. Keep track of those records, because what's happening is, I talk a lot about this industry with contacts and friends I have from other industries, from previous lives I've been in. I worked in lots of other manufacturing industries. And while we have done a great job in this industry of coming up the curve on technology, we're still very young industry in that things like just the basic management and leadership techniques that are just not common in this industry because we have so many small businesses. And so one of the areas that shows out is lack of an organized, documented, rigorous safety program in fab shops. I spent some time on site this week with a client that gets it, and they are in the process of developing that type of a program. And it's structured, it's written. There's documentation for everything that you do. And they're going to be using the NSI materials to help make that work.
Yeah, actually, and it's interesting you mentioned the monitoring that, and again, I want to be careful not to misstate things. That may be another one of those emergency or temporary emergency standards in California is ongoing monitoring of the silica levels, and having a database of that, having that data available.
And that's smart to do anyway. In textiles with brown lung, even though we had all the stuff that I talked about in that industry, monitoring was an ongoing process. You know, they were different people, different times of day, different shifts, different areas of the plant, tracking and recording all of that. I mean, I don't think we need to go quite to the level that was. But then in textile plants, you're talking about people, you know, plants that run 24/7. You got hundreds of people who work there. It's a different environment than what we're talking about. But there are a lot of things like that need to happen. Silicosis, obviously a big deal. As I look at safety in general for this industry and go back to some of my previous experiences, I'm seeing lots of other potential that I really kind of feel like silicosis is where OSHA is going to get its foot in the door of the industry. And once it gets in, I think there are going to be other issues that we're going to really have to deal with that'll be really important. Have you had any conversations, any talks with anybody, NSI or elsewhere, about what some of these issues might be?
Well, I mean, that's kind of, if you open the door there, I'm gonna walk through it. I mean,
I'll be right there beside you. We'll walk through it together.
I've gotten the permission of the NSI. You know, I've even asked. I'm like, hey, I find myself the chairman of this committee, but you know, we manufacture a piece of equipment that the reason that we even started it was 100% because of the safety issue of lifting countertops on site and what we knew it was doing to people. And so it's like I got to be able to speak freely about both, you know. And so even though I don't think there's anything, I'm not aware of anything, and I wish there was. And if I ever have the opportunity to direct it or influence it, I will do it at 110% of my ability to force this issue, because I do believe, and it's not about selling machines. It's about, in the same way that we know what happens when you breathe silica for too long.
Yeah.
It's not a maybe. It's not. It's predictable. We know what happens when you carry 3cm countertops in and day out. It is a equally predictable outcome that if you do that long enough, the detriment to your physical health is just it's just a matter of time. And for a lot of installers, it is a permanent, whether they're disabled in the you know, Disability Act sense, where they're not working and they're being paid to sit at home. But if you're talking about lost physical ability for the remainder of your life, it's not a question. And so that's high on my list, is just knowing what I know. And again, it's just like silica. We talk about that topic, makes me really uncomfortable. There are people that worked for me carrying countertops into people's houses that to this day will never have the physical health that they had before they went to work for my company, because they installed those counters for too long in the old school traditional manner of loading a truck by hand, unloading it by hand, carrying those counters up a driveway, down a hall, picking them up and setting them on a cabinet, putting their bodies at risk to prevent a countertop from breaking, lifting things that should never be lifted by 2 or 3 individuals under any circumstances. And so it's uncomfortable. It's like, I know people right now who have lost physical capabilities and will never recuperate as a result of that work that they did working in my countertop company. And it's man, and it's doesn't have to be that way. So
agree 100%. I don't, you know, I've never met a fab shop owner that intentionally wanted that to happen to their employees. I don't think anybody who owns a business intentionally wants to harm their employees. It's stupid business. Okay. It just to be blunt about it. I think it's a matter of lack of awareness. You mentioned, you know, having been out of the industry, dealing with slabs day to day, and now as you do it from time to time in your current business, how it's such a visible and it's so obvious what a big risk it is. We just get kind of immune to it being in the industry. And in full disclosure, for those who don't know, you own you developed the no lift cart, install cart, and you own that business or run that business. And you did that for, I think, the right reasons because of what you say. You saw that happening to people. But you talked about lack of standards for that. I'm going to kind of delve back into the archives of my brain, the deep, dark recesses of history here. We'll go back in the age of the dinosaur, working in other, large manufacturing plants, other industries. The lifting standards that I remember from OSHA were something like a maximum lift of 75 pounds for a human being. And that number reduced based on frequency. And a lot of the large companies I work with, large companies are bigger targets, big, deep pockets. So, OSHA likes to hit them hard with fines. But I remember multiple companies in different industries that set lifting limits at somewhere like 35 and 45 pounds, because typically people weren't doing this just once or twice a day. They were doing it multiple times a day. And if they were doing this like dozens or hundreds of times a day, they'd lower that limit to 15 to 20 pounds. Now, what that means is a human being couldn't lift that amount without some sort of mechanical assistance. And so if my memory is correct, and I'm not saying that it is, but if it's anywhere close, it's pretty obvious what's going to happen when OSHA understands what happens outside the fab shop.
Yeah. Well, so you're really, touching on the topic of the cumulative lifting, so you reduce the amount if you're doing a lot of lifts, and because there is that factor. So most people will find this unbelievable. And the first time I did the math on this, I was like, this cannot be true. But if you take an 85 square foot kitchen, and let's just say it's quartz, the lighter side, 15 pounds a square foot, that's 1,330 pounds total weight. 4 or 5 pieces probably make that up. If you lift those counters, put them in your truck, you lift them again to take them out of your truck, and then you pick them up a third time to set them on the cabinets, that's over 4,000 pounds a day cumulative. It's 20,000 pounds a week. If you get a 2-week vacation, that's 50 weeks a year. That is 1,000,000 pounds a year cumulatively, and that's conservative.
Wait. Hang on. Let's back this up. I got a Clemson brain, so let's walk through this math a little slower here, okay? How many pounds for a quartz kitchen?
Let's just say it's 85 square feet at 15 pounds a square foot. That's 1,300 pounds. Plus
and doing that 3 times for an install. So
Yep.
in the truck, out of the truck, and on the cabinets.
Yep.
Okay. And then how many installs a day?
Well, that's just assuming you're doing 185 square foot kitchen a day. And that's what I mean. That's a conservative estimate.
How many times have you met an install crew that only did 185 square foot kitchen a day?
No, it's very unusual. Yeah.
Right,
and you look at the contract installers, they're doing sometimes 2 or 3 times that much square footage a day to make the economics work, to get enough dollars
to make a good living. Yeah.
Yeah.
So 85 square foot a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year is 1,000,000 pounds a year of lifting. And we all know that install crews are not doing just 1 kitchen a day. So you go 2 kitchens a day, that's 2,000,000 pounds. 3 kitchens a day is 3,000,000 pounds.
Yeah.
Anybody who's, and I assume you've done this, but anybody who's looked at the nature of back injuries, how the disc happens, we always hear about, the person who steps off the curb at the street and throws their back out, and now they got a ruptured disc, got to have surgery. It wasn't that step that did it. Those are all cumulative. But I remember being told in the training that I got was that disc is kind of like an onion. It's got layers. Mm-hmm. You can have an acute injury where you rupture all of those layers or the majority of them, or you can have this, as you know, about the 1,000,000 pounds a year, that cumulative over and over and over and over again. And then all of a sudden, an installer goes to pick up his grandkid, throws his back out at night, and needs back surgery. And it wasn't the grandkid that did it. It was all the countertops he's been picking up.
Yeah. And it's exactly right. That progression. And it's, what's interesting is there's virtually no studies. Well, there's not virtually, there are 0 studies as it relates to the stone industry on this issue. But there is a ton of research and studies done on paramedics. And I wrote a research paper actually on this for a class I was taking, because there's so much available data for paramedics and EMTs, because they're doing the same thing. They're picking up those stretchers or those gurneys every day.
Yeah.
And You're exactly right. So out of that, there's this process, the disc degeneration. It starts with degeneration, that accumulative effect. You're doing the same lift over and over, the compounding of that. Then you get a bulge disc, and eventually it's a herniated disc where that in event you can even rupture it. But that is exactly right. And even guys who get to the point where they're like, I can't do this anymore, and they stop and they go to do something else, even a year or two later, the effects of that will eventually get so bad to where, like, just like you're saying, they got to have surgery. And they're never the same after that, even though the surgeons are, 98%, return to normalcy. That's not the norm. It is, in many cases, a permanent and limiting injury that you will have for the rest of your life.
I think back to people that I've known that have had back surgery, and the percentage of those that have been successful, even 80-90% successful. I struggle to remember any of them that were. It's usually back surgery it kind of gives you some relief, but not necessarily a lot. So, and we're talking about, those discs don't heal themselves well, if at all.
No.
Muscles that you damage, tear, whatever, you can heal those. We're even talking about joints, hips, shoulders, those kind of things. So this is lifting weights, lifting countertops, all that's I think is going to be kind of the next big thing. And as you get into looking at other things OSHA can find in a shop, I think one thing that we're going to run into pretty quickly is going to be forklifts in a shop. Because a lot of manufacturing plants I've been in where OSHA has said, okay, you're going to paint lines on the floor, and there will be one lane for motorized traffic and a separate defined and lined lane for foot traffic, and never the twain shall meet. And I think that's another area we're going to get into. And then I can't tell you the number of shops I've walked into. They're cutting wet, they're polishing wet, and you look down on the floor and there's electrical extension cords running everywhere. And it's just, it blows my mind that people are not paying attention to that. And then airlines on the floor, trip hazards. I walk through plants and look at breaker boxes and that 3-foot clearance is required so you can get into and shut off the power if something happens and you got to de-energize something, lock out, tag out. I mean, there's just a whole raft of things that as an industry, because of so many small businesses, we're just not used to being part of. These are things I think are going to become pretty common discussion points in this industry over the next several years. And I'm not saying this to say we're doing a bad job. I'm saying we just aren't aware of it. It's time to be thinking about it. And if you do it right, it's not expensive. And it's the right thing to do for the safety of our people, for the health of our people. It's the right thing to do to minimize business liability. And many times when you go in and you start taking action to address these issues, morale improves, people understand you care about them. When you do this right, many times productivity can improve because now we're finding a better, quicker, easier way to get this done. When you look at the real challenge we find trying to hire people who are skilled, who are good at what they do for this industry, if we quit wearing them out and tearing them up, we're going to have more to pull from. We'll be able to keep them longer. Common sense there. So there are a lot of good things to come out of this. While it can sound like gloom and doom, there's a lot of upside if we'll address this and get with it.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. The result of those improvements from a safety standpoint will absolutely be felt in a operational sense. And you get all those extension cords off the floor, you get airlines off the floor, you're not tripping. The efficiency will naturally improve. And that the fact is, if you look at the silica issue, if we don't solve this, OSHA will conclude that we can't regulate ourselves to the level that protects the workers. And so the solutions are there. It is not prohibitively expensive to make your shop safer. And if you choose not to, boy, the cost of being forced into it. In fact, it's interesting. The guy from Australia that I was mentioning, He bought a no lift from us, and so I was kind of doing a follow-up call, and it's like, hey, by the way, I heard that Australia banned quartz. Well, when they started that, their first step was the enforcement of, he had to go from basically being a dry shop with a bridge saw to a completely automated shop, and the water controls and just the all of that he had to do sort of unexpectedly and all at once. And he said it nearly bankrupted him because his business was just not at the level and he barely was able to absorb all of those required changes that they mandated kind of just on a dime. If you want to stay in business, this is what you have to do. Or you either go out of business, defy the standards, or you comply. And that cost of compliance at that level is, that's prohibitive. But in terms of what you can do starting today to just begin improving the safety in your shop and out in the field, man, there's just like you said, going wet, getting those lines off the floor. There's all kinds of things that can be done that will make that operation safer for the workers that are out in it.
And
there's no
that's,
excuse.
yeah, and that's the primary reason to do it is for your people, because anybody can buy machines, but anybody can buy materials, and you can rent a space to do the work, but you got to have people who will show up every day and do a good job. And if you don't take care of them, it's tough it's very tough on them, can be, and it can be tough on you too as a shop owner. So Aaron, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate it. If folks want to know more about what's happening with NSI and safety, obviously they can go to the Natural Stone Institute website and get that. Any other places they need to go? Anything else they need to look at? And if they wanted to talk to you, how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah, first I'd go to just Google the Natural Stone Institute. Their website's very available. They got tons of resources, and they are aggressively evolving that website to improve and to get up to speed to handle the amount of traffic, because it's on the radar now. People are realizing I better take care of this. There are increasingly going to be and already regional events that are being put on to where you can come. Maybe it's at a fab shop, maybe it's at a slab distributor, and they're putting on those courses so that you walk out of there with your certification. And so, yeah, just if you're looking, the resources are there. Go to the Natural Stone Institute's website, and you can find them. One way or the other, you can get your hands on those materials. I mean, if for some odd reason someone wanted to get in touch with me, they can go to aaroncrowley.com and you reach out to me that way. So I'm not real big on social media, but you can email me from there. My email is aaron@aaroncrowley.com. So thank you, Ed, for the opportunity to talk about this subject. We need to talk about it more. We can either voluntarily address this as an industry and as individual fab shops, or we can be forced into it. It's going to be one or the other.
I can't think of a better closing statement than that. And we're recording this in early April. Coverings is coming up in about 2 or 3 weeks. This episode will come out before Coverings.
Wow.
Will No Lift be at Coverings?
Yes. Well, thank you for asking. We will. We've got a booth right across the aisle from the SFA cage. Booth 6269 will be there with a brand new power tilt, our latest model. Although we've got some other really exciting stuff about to come out. But yeah, we'll have our power tilt, brand new latest model on display there, and love to see anybody that's got time to visit.
Good. Fantastic. Aaron, thanks again, and really appreciate your time.
Wow, Ed, likewise. Thank you.
Okay.